السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لعل أمريكا كانت وما تزال منطقة منقسمة عرقيا، ولعل حواجز العبودية ما تزال تضرب في صميم المجتمع الأمريكي، ولعل هذا الواقع ألقى بظلاله على العلاقة مع العالم الإسلامي. مع المؤرخ الأميركي لاري تايس نتحدث عن العبودية والتمييز العنصري وتاريخهما في أمريكا اليوم من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. لعل السردية الأميركية الرسمية حرصت على طمس حروب الإبادة ضد السكان الأصليين، وأشاعت أن المستعمرين الجدد أو الحجاج كما أطلقوا على أنفسهم احتفلوا مع جيرانهم القبائل الهندية من البيكو وغيرها بعيد الحصاد بحسب المؤرخين، وهي مناسبة يتداخل فيها العامل الديني بالسياسي لخدمة شريحة تعتقد أنها رسل الله وورثته على الأرض. جدير بالذكر أن احتفالات الحجاج البيوريتنز أو القديسين عام 1621 جاء في سياق هروب جماعي من القارة الأوروبية من ويلات حرب 30 عاما التي اجتاحت وسط أوروبا، والتي كان التباين المذهبي فتيل إشعالها بين البروتستانت والكاثوليك. يرى المتابعون أن السردية الرسمية الأمريكية وكما تذكرها المناهج التعليمية تمجد المستعمرين الإنجليز الذين وبعدما استقروا في موطنهم الجديد وجهوا الدعوة إلى جيرانهم الهنود للاحتفال بالنعم الإلهية. أما بحسب الخبراء فإن الرواية الأصلية بعد نفض الكثير من غبار التزوير عنها فتشير بوضوح إلى أن أوائل المستعمرين هبطوا على شواطئ جزيرة راوناك على سواحل كارولاينا الشمالية اليوم. استقبلهم الأصليون بالترحاب عام 1580 وشاركوهم نعمة الأرض وما تنتجه، وآووهم وكسوهم وأطعموهم وعلموهم أسباب البقاء في هذه الطبيعة الغريبة عنهم. ولكن حالما اشتد عودهم قليلا راحوا يخترعون الأعذار للقتل العشوائي ويتحينون الفرص لإتلاف المحاصيل وإحراق القرى والحقول وقطع أسباب الحياة عن الهنود الحمر عمدا، كما تشير الروايات الموضوعية التي برزت في النصف الثاني من القرن العشرين. أما السكان الأصليون فلم تكد تمضي 60 سنة على ولادة الأسطورة الأميركية حتى قضى الحجاج ونسلهم المقدس على السكان الأصليين من قبائل البيكو والنيانتك، وفق ما وصف المؤرخ الفلسطيني منير العكش في كتابه أمريكا والإبادات الجماعية. وأضاف إن الآباء المؤسسين للكيان السياسي الأمريكي مضوا على خطى جورج واشنطن في تعليله لطرد الهنود من أوطانهم بقوة السلاح، بأنه لا يختلف عن طرد الوحوش المفترسة من غاباتها. لاري تايس الكاتب والمؤرخ الأميركي من ولاية فيلادلفيا الأمريكية يحدثنا من الداخل عن العبودية والتمييز العنصري وتاريخهما في أمريكا.
I grew up in the American South, and people who know the United States know that the South was one of the most racially divided parts of the United States. And as I was growing up, we had a revolution in the United States. It's called the Civil Rights Movement. And the Civil Rights Movement occurred where I lived, and I saw blacks marching and protesting. And
with the bus incident, you mean?
But the thing that I saw the most was called sit-ins in public restaurants, where blacks had not been allowed to use the restaurants, and so they started sitting in the seats that had previously been occupied only by white people. And I saw this in my community, and so I had lots of conversations with my family and with other people in my community. Our schools were segregated too, and I couldn't understand why whites in the United States were so opposed to blacks going to the same school and using the same facilities. I mean, I grew up in that culture, but somehow it made no sense to me. And I tried to figure out, why was our society like that? And without making moral judgments. I mean, I was trying to figure out.
Did you get the answer for that?
No, I still don't have the answer to that. I still don't. That started me on a career of trying to understand divisions in societies. And so it expanded from looking at racial divides in the United States to looking at other types of divides around the world. And so this included, religious divides.
Of course, sectarian divides, denomination.
Yeah, and I mean within the Christian church.
Nationality divide.
Yeah, nationality, class divide,
castes.
Castes, ghettos, housing separation, and our society is pervasive with divides.
But is the US of A today also racially divided?
It's not as racially divided as it was when I grew up. In that doors are open to all peoples to go where they would like to, pretty much to live where they would like to pursue careers in many places, but the divide is still there. It is clear in the hiring practices and social practices,
and in certain kind of language or terminology used against each other, for example.
Yes, I mean there are words that blacks can use to call themselves, but no whites can use those words.
Exactly.
And there are words that other ethnic groups, Jews, Polish people, and so on, can call themselves, but others cannot use them. Cannot do that.
Yes.
I mean, if you sit among blacks in the United States today, if you sit among Indians, and I work with Indian groups in the United States. I work closely with the Tuscarora Nation, which is
the indigenous.
Yeah, the indigenous people. They are still separated, and they're separated by language, by practices, by recognition. Our government policy in the United States still tends to separate these people, and I'm not saying that all of this is hatred. There are institutional practices that persist no matter what. So we have a long way to go in dealing with it.
And one of which is the Pro-Slavery: A History of the Defense of Slavery in America, 1701-1840, and this was published in the year 2004. Now, this book is a thorough and unprecedented study and probing at the very core of the American political consciousness from the colonial period through the early republic. What thoughts have you focused on in this in-depth study?
When I started on this project, it was assumed that the only people who defended slavery, that is in writing, who wrote actual defenses of slavery, not just attitudes, but who went to the trouble of writing a defense of slavery, it was assumed that these were slaveholders who wrote this. And so I compiled data on people who wrote defenses of slavery, and as it turned out, it was mainly people from the northern part of the United States and not from the South. and it was primarily clergymen, Christian ministers. And but it also included many other types of clergymen, including Jewish rabbis and other religious traditions as well. And so I asked the question, why is this? How can this be? And the answer I came up with was that educated, articulate people, and primarily men, although there were some women who defended slavery as well, were well educated, and they really believed that Africans, blacks, could not be part of American society. And they really believed that
they only exist as slaves.
They existed as slaves, but also as free blacks. And this attitude affected not only slaves, but also free blacks. And so by the time of the American Civil War, which we explain traditionally as being about slavery, actually black codes had been created so that whether blacks were slaves or whether they were free, they were going to be excluded. So this took me into deeper questions about the nature of American thought. I mean, the United States is supposed to be the land of liberty, freedom, and equality, and yet we had these practices.
So it existed back in the 18th century?
Yes.
In the 18th, not in the 19th century period. 18th
and 19th century.
Right.
Slavery, you mean?
Yes.
Well, slavery was abolished during the American Civil War, so 1863 and then 1865, and our Constitution was changed in 1867 to abolish slavery completely. And so basically, America was divided into white people who were white and color. So this then, it's a somewhat complicated story, but when Europeans went to America and they departed from Europe at precisely one of the most significant years in all of this history is 1492. And 1492, if you ask any student in the United States, they will say that's the year that Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and it's supposed to be the opening of America. What I teach is that it was the beginning of a new war against all the rest of the world, including particularly Islamic people.
Right, and we're going to, yes, allow me, sir, to stop you now for a short break, and then after the break we're going to talk a bit more, since you mentioned the Islamic period. How did you become interested in the Islamic religion and in talking and researching the Islamic religion more and more? But after the break, sir. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا.
لاري تايس الكاتب والمؤرخ الأميريكي من ولاية فيلادلفيا والمؤسس والرئيس الحالي للمؤتمر الدولي للجوائز المتميزة في الفنون والعلوم الإنسانية والعلوم والتكنولوجيا والبيئة والسلام والدين والشواغل الإنسانية، يشرح من الداخل كيف أصبح مهتما بالديانة الإسلامية وكيف يفهم العلاقة التاريخية ما بين المسيحيين والعوالم الإسلامية.
When I was a boy, I decided to be a minister, a Christian minister, Methodist in particular. And so I committed myself to becoming a minister, and I went to divinity school and was ordained as a Methodist minister. Along the way, fortunately, I went to Duke University undergraduate school, and we had a wonderful teacher who taught world religions, and he happened to be a practicing Muslim, and so I started studying Islamic religion at that time. I mean, he was such a persuasive, wonderful teacher who really taught us to respect all religions and to try to understand how they originated, how they fit into their societies, and how they were sustained and stuff like that. So it became a very interesting study to me. And so then when I became a historian and started studying blacks in the United States, lo and behold, many of the slaves who were brought to the United States in the slave trade came from Eastern Africa and Northern Africa, and they were Muslims. And they tried to practice their religion. And in fact, we've been documenting more and more Muslim slaves and slaves who wrote in Arabic, and so it became really interesting. But when I really dived into it headlong was when I started studying the Atlantic region, and then from the Atlantic Atlantic Ocean region, to the world. I mean, the history that is taught is that Columbus went in search of a new route to the Orient, to tap the spices and all the treasures of India and the East, but actually they didn't want to have to deal with Muslims anymore. And it was like, we don't want to deal. You people are too troublesome, so we're going to find some other way to get there. The experience of Europeans going to America, in which we, European background, we basically annihilated the indigenous populations in North America. We enslaved blacks from Africa. And then when we pivoted back to the world again, instead of treating Muslim peoples with respect or even with anger, it was that these lands were available to be colonized just as North and South America were. And so from that time forward, the attitude of Americans toward the Middle East is almost identical to the attitude that was taken into the New World, is that the people who live there are not really worthy of being part of
the society.
Of society. And so this had vast implications, and if you trace this through, I mean, imagine at the end of the First World War, a group of people in London and Paris dividing up the Middle East the way they divided up North America and South America, by drawing lines without respect to history and culture. And so since that time, Americans cannot understand why people in the Middle East can't get along with each other, can't, live within the boundaries of their nations, but nobody quite appreciates that these countries were created by people who were not in the Middle East. So that attitude really comes down right.
You mean the borders?
The borders.
Yes,
yeah,
the Sykes-Picot, for example.
Yeah, the borders. And so that comes down to the present in attitudes towards people of Muslim religion, because right in the very time in which we live, if somebody takes a gun, and we've got so many guns in the United States, it's unbelievable, and kills 57 people, the first question is it a regular person or is it a Muslim? And a regular person can kill 57 people, and it's not an act of terrorism.
While if it's a Muslim,
if it's a Muslim, it's terrorism. if it's
this is part of the wave of Islamophobia, and then with this
yes,
this swarming of those Islamist extremists,
yes,
you know, the takfiris,
yeah,
and you know all this trend. So this has also added to this distortion of the image of Islam.
Yes, yeah, the distortion is complete. I mean, the 1979 sit-ins in Iran started changing attitudes of Americans up until basically the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Iran was viewed as a wonderful romantic land of literature and you know, beautiful people and buildings and so on, but that completely transformed in 1979. And then when 9/11 occurred, the transformation was absolutely complete.
American author and historian from Philadelphia, Professor Lari Taiss, many thanks indeed for joining us.
Thank you. It's my honor.
It's our honor, sir. It's our honor to host you here.
Yes, thank you very
thank
much.
you, my dear. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك. من الداخل من كل فريق العمل من كل الميادين من طهران. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.